going to hit the record button now. And after each presentation, there will be some time for questions. And I would really appreciate, you can use the question and answer option or the chat option in the webinar, and I'll be monitoring the questions. And I'll put as many questions as I can to the presenters at the end of each session. But if there isn't time for all the questions, I'll try and summarize them as best I can. Everybody will be sent a certificate after the webinar, so just keep that in mind. That's something that's very useful for you to keep a record of your attendance. And now, just to mention who are giving the presentations, I'm going to hand back to Tobias to talk to you a little bit about that.
Thank you, Deirdre. Today we're going to have 3 presentations. First presentation will be by Ruth Farragher from Brisbane, Australia, and she will be talking about her experiences on transitioning. Her presentation is titled Moving On, Moving Out. Second presentation will be by colleagues from Ireland, Michael Shevlin, Des Aston and Joanne Banks, all from Trinity College Dublin. And their presentation has the title Transitions to Post-School Settings for Students with Intellectual Disabilities in Ireland, and they report on various research studies they conducted. Last but not least, presentation is by Amani Karisa from University of Cape Town in South Africa. He will present on a very important topic, I think, with the title, I'm considering stopping his schooling so that the father teaches him any job, navigating the transitions of disabled children in Africa. And Amani will address not so often research topics, a few of fathers, and will address the issue from a post-colonial perspective. So our first presenter will be Ruth Farragher, we are very glad to have you here today, and I'm going to introduce you to the audience now. Ruth Farragher has been advocating for disability rights since her teenage years. She is a well-known self-advocate from Brisbane, Australia, and has been considered as role model for many people with and without disabilities. Ruth gave several interviews for Australian newspapers, such as the Brisbane Times, and has been asked to speak at several international conferences, such as the World Down Syndrome Conference. She received a commendation at the 2013 Chief Minister's Inclusion Awards as one of the territory's emerging young leaders. Ruth, we are very glad to have you here today. Now the floor is all yours.
Yes. Okay. So, let me share the screen. Do that today. Thank you, Tobias, for introducing me. I was born in 1996, and this is me in my blue basket. Since now I'm now grown up and speaking at United Nations at New York. I am from Brisbane in Australia. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you. It is a great honor. This is what I want to talk about. I got my Queensland Certificate of Education. I did practical training at Munro Childcare Centre in Brisbane. I did 5 subjects in Year 12 English, Maths A, Biology, Dance, and started the Certificate 3 in childcare. I studied at TAFE College, that stands for Technical and Further Education. I got help from my TAFE teachers. They helped me learn. They also helped me on my job placements. I have a Certificate 3. This is the qualification I need to work in childcare. My mum helped me apply for jobs on Seek.com. I had to have a resume and write covering letters. I applied lots of jobs. I was very excited. My mum came with me and helped me during the interview. Kylie showed me around the center. It was lovely. She offered me a job working 2 days a week while I finished my studies. I lived a long way from my work. It takes an hour to drive there. Mum or dad drive me in the morning. In the afternoon, I had to catch 4 buses to get home. Mum taught me how to do that. The photo shows the paper I carried at the first time on my own, and I didn't need it after that. I worked at a few different centers before I got my full-time job. I had to learn how new ways that each place did things. They have different rules. I have a full-time job and I won a award from my center, and I have been improved from last night. After I got my full-time job, I had enough money to move into my own place. I moved into a townhouse that my parents own and my friend from school moved into. I want to have parties at my house. This is where I serve the drinks. and this is me chilling out in my veranda. I do cooking together and washing up after dinner. I do my own washing if my clothes are dirty. I go to the shops if I need to get groceries. These are the rules my friend and I worked out together. I ride my bike to the shops to get more groceries. I catch the train to work. The station is near my house. I have a 7-minute walk from the station to my work. I use my phone to pay the bills and pay the internet from my house. One time when I was looking for my red bin, there's a problem with that. So I had to ring up Brisbane City Council to help me to get my new bin. So, and then my parents don't need me for that. So luckily I sort that out. And even though I live independently, I still spend time with my family, and there's no need to get sad. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Okay, thank you very much, Ruth. That was really interesting. And we have 1 or 2 questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure can.
Okay. There's a lot of people saying that you're very inspirational and they really enjoyed the presentation. But there was one person was interested, Ruth, in relation to the type, when you were in college, what kind of supports did you get in college?
My support teacher helped me study.
Okay.
They helped me with my assessments, and they helped me to understand the
Understand the question.
understand the questions.
And somebody else wanted to know what was the best thing about moving out?
The best thing to move out, I actually don't miss my parents.
Oh.
Okay, so being independent was the best thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And another question.
And like
sorry, Ruth. Sorry. Keep going. I interrupted you.
That's right. I actually like to have friends at my place all the time, so that's why I don't miss my parents.
Okay, okay. And the last question that I have here is oh sorry, there's another one here, Ruth. what somebody wants to know, what advice would you give to somebody else when they're moving into the community, into their own place?
I think my advice, it is actually your choice. You don't have to move out, or if you wanna live with your parents, that's fine. I tend to like just have friends over all the time, so that's why you don't need parents.
Okay,
Sometimes.
So sorry now for rushing
I
on.
was not nervous.
Okay, Ruth,
I
sorry for
don't get nervous at all, so I'm so happy that I've got.
Okay, sorry, just another question, Ruth. It's just in relation to your job. Just somebody's interested in, do you get the same pay as the other people that you work with?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, that's cool.
And the last thing, Ruth, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you would have liked to have talked about?
I actually don't know, to be honest. So
Okay, no, that's fine, Ruth. I think I've gone through most of the questions. I'm just going to, Tobias might want to say a last word there.
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful presentation, Ruth. Just really amazing, very interesting. We're very glad to have here on your insights into transitioning from school to work.
thank you.
We're very glad to have you here today.
Okay, so hopefully, Ruth, I know it's very late there, but hopefully you'll stay and listen to the next presentation, which Tobias is going to introduce now.
Yes.
Okay.
As mentioned already, our second presentation is coming from a beautiful island of Ireland and is facilitated by three presenters, all from Trinity College Dublin. And I'm going to introduce the three presenters now to you. And first, Des Aston. Des Aston is National and Schools Coordinator at the Trinity Center for People with Intellectual Disabilities. Des' main research interests are effective practices for helping students transition to work and participation of students with intellectual disabilities in tertiary education. Des Aston is also chairperson of the Inclusive National Higher Education Forum. Welcome, Des. Joanne Banks. Dr. Joanne Banks is assistant professor in inclusive education at the School of Education in Trinity College Dublin. She has worked for over a decade at the ESRI in social research, focusing on inclusive education, disability, educational inequality, and socioeconomic disadvantage. Her research focuses on inclusive education in policy and practice, examining system-level and school-level processes that are supported by evidence and that promote quality and equity for all students, with specific attention to students with a disability and those from socio-economically deprived backgrounds. Welcome, Joanne. And the third presenter of the Irish team is Michael Shefflin. Professor Dr. Michael Shefflin is based at the School of Education at Trinity College Dublin. He has been advocating, researching, and practicing inclusive education of persons with intellectual disabilities at various levels, including the inclusion of persons with intellectual disabilities at his own university, as he is the director of the Trinity Center for People with Intellectual Disabilities. Michael has published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles and chapters in numerous books. He has been involved in several policy-making initiatives within Irish education in relation to the development of inclusive learning environments in schools and higher education. Michael has been involved in the work of the IESID Special Interest Research Group on Inclusive Education since years, and published alongside with colleagues of our circ, several influential papers in peer-reviewed papers. Michael, we are very glad to have such a beacon of inclusive education Ireland here today with us. And we are looking forward to your presentation now. The floor, all yours.
Thank you for that introduction, Tobias. So I will be presenting, my name is Des, and Tobias has introduced us already. I'll be presenting today on behalf of my colleagues, Dr. Joanne Banks and Professor Michael Shevlin, just for the purpose of screen sharing and things like that over Zoom. But Michael and Joanne are happy to take any questions towards the end, so you can direct questions at any of us. So to give a bit of context to our research study, which is transitions to post-school settings for people with intellectual disabilities in Ireland. So we already know that people with intellectual disabilities are much more likely than their non-disabled peers to be placed in day services, with 23,500 people with intellectual disabilities attending full-time day service provision in 2017. They're more likely to be unemployed, with just 6% in paid employment. They're living at an increased risk of poverty. They're more dependent on social welfare, and there's very little expectation for them to progress on to further or higher education, with just 0.15% in higher education in 2017 as well. So the aims and objectives of our study were, we wanted to explore the nature and quality of career guidance for students with intellectual disabilities in Irish mainstream second level schools. We also wanted to examine the extent to which students with intellectual disabilities are academically and socially prepared for life after school. Lastly, then, we wanted to gather data on the type of guidance or support provided to students with intellectual disabilities in mainstream settings. A very brief rundown of the methodology. It was a mixed method study using a convergent design model. So in phase 1, we conducted a national survey of school principals and distributed a survey to 722 mainstream schools in the Republic of Ireland. The response rate was around 15%. In phase 2, then, we conducted qualitative study on school faculty's perspective of post-school transitions. That consisted of 9 virtual qualitative interviews because of the COVID-19 school closures. And that included 5 special educational needs coordinators and 4 guidance counsellors in mainstream schools. Then between August and October, we had phase 3 where we merged the data, and in phase 4, we are currently interpreting the data. For our international colleagues and attendees here today, I wanted to give a very brief overlook of the Irish education system and the way it's structured. And if we start here with the green box, we have primary school in the mainstream setting, which is usually children between the age of 5 and 12 years old. Then they progress on to what's known here as secondary school, and they'll enter the junior cycle or lower secondary, which is usually children between 12 and 15 years of age. And then at the end of their junior cycle, they will sit a state exam known as the junior certificate. After that, then they can progress on to the senior cycle or the upper secondary, which is the students typically, they will go into the route of the left-hand side brown box, which is the leaving certificate, which is a high stakes state exam that, depending on students' grades within that exam, they're awarded points, and those points go towards accessing higher education. Additionally, within that stream, then you have an additional module that students can take known as the Leaving Certificate Vocational Program, which teaches vocational skills and things like that. The other option then, the other stream for students within the Irish system, within senior cycle or upper secondary, is the Leaving Cert Applied. The Leaving Cert Applied is a vocational program and a pre-apprenticeship program where students will learn about transferable work skills and life skills. Unfortunately, the LCA program is only operational in a very small number of schools. I think it's as low as 6 or 7% of schools offer this program. So depending on where you live in the country, this program might not be available to you. Then on the right-hand side, we have the special education system, which runs parallel to the mainstream education system. Within the special school system, this is designed for students with special needs and intellectual disabilities. and students enter at the age of 5 and exit at the age of 18. 18 is the cutoff age within the Irish system for compulsory schooling. So our study then, the first survey that we distributed, it wanted to get information about placements, and in particular whether students with intellectual disabilities are placed in mainstream classes or in special classes. This graph shows that just over half the students with intellectual disabilities are in mainstream classes. There was 34% in special classes attached to a mainstream school with 6 or less students within that special class, and a further 12% of students were reported by their school principal to be in larger special classes. So a larger class would be anything over 6 students. The survey also sought to understand whether school principals considered their school to be inclusive by asking them about whether they considered themselves to have an inclusive philosophy. So based on that conceptual understanding, the findings show that 80% of school principals felt their school had an inclusive philosophy to a great extent, so an overwhelming response there. The survey results on school principals' views on inclusion seem to translate into the use of individual education plans, or also known as IEPs, across the schools, with 80% of school principals reporting that they used IEPs with their students. However, the IEPs do not appear to be used for the purpose of transitioning out of school. Within the qualitative strand then, we identified some themes and sub-themes, and these were probably the most relevant ones for today's presentation. And under the defining inclusive education, all interviewees agreed that inclusive education involves elements of equality, fairness, and making the curriculum as accessible to all students as possible. And that all the participants also agreed that inclusive education should take place in a mainstream setting where possible. So under the personal approaches to inclusion, the special educational needs coordinators that participated, they leaned towards an equity-focused approach to inclusion, whereas the guidance professionals leaned towards an equality-focused approach.
I think you have to be flexible, and I think you have to have an awareness and an understanding of the person sitting in front of you. You have to care. You have to care. It's not very theoretical.
So what we mean by this is that the SENCO, or the special needs coordinators, they tended to value person-centered approaches to support and inclusion, whereas guidance counsellors tended to express an open door policy and a system that is the same for students with or without disabilities. The issue with this really is that opening the door to students with disabilities addresses the first barrier that many students or people with disabilities will experience, which is access, but it doesn't constitute an equitable service. And there were no reasonable accommodations within the guidance provision to ensure an equitable service. Under capacity and identity, then, this was another theme that was identified. And I suppose what we mean by that is that capacity to promote inclusion and drive an inclusive agenda within their school, and then how they identify inclusive practices and identifying who is responsible for inclusion in their school. The benefits to inclusion, participants valued formal buddy systems and peer support in and outside the classroom. And they were able to see out of these peer support and buddy systems that students with intellectual disabilities had raised expectations, higher levels of self-determination and resilience, all of which are associated with successful post-school transitions. Then we saw that some schools had developed a reputation for inclusion.
We are seen as an inclusive school. We get some students who come to us, maybe who might have a secondary school nearer them. They would choose to come to us.
So these schools with the reputation for inclusion tended to be the community, comprehensive and vocational schools. And those schools tended to prioritize the special or the social and emotional development of students over the academics.
It's something we've been working hard on. We do push, if you like, the well-being of the students, the inclusivity of the students ahead of the academics, if you like, or at least on par. Actually, to be honest, I would say ahead of.
So we also saw within this study some similarities to the extensive literature on the private fee-paying and Irish-speaking colleges in Ireland. that had less diversity and less students with intellectual disabilities enrolled in their schools. And we attribute this to the competitive nature of the Leaving Certificate exam and that high stakes exam, and issues to do with social class. Then under facilitating inclusion, a majority of the people that were interviewed said their school was good, or at least very good at inclusion, and attributed this to their socioeconomic status, which awarded them extra resources and extra funding for that type of thing. There was only one participant that said their school was very poor at inclusion. And they said this was because there was tokenistic gestures, but no real attempt throughout the school for inclusion. Where school leadership had a background in special or inclusive education, so that's the principal or the deputy principal, their school faculty felt better supported to implement an inclusive agenda within the school. Where school leaders were more concerned with attracting grants or funding, participants felt they were fighting an uphill battle.
I would rather someone professional came in, because teachers just see me and they're like, here she goes on again.
So within the survey then, other barriers highlighted by survey respondents included the perceived lack of places or opportunities for students with intellectual disabilities when they leave school. Principals appear to be referring to a lack of appropriate or suitable settings on courses specifically targeted at young people with intellectual disabilities, such as adult day services or rehabilitative training courses. The barriers then that we found in the qualitative interviews came under facilitating and transitions, where no participants claimed their school is very good at supporting post-school transitions for students with intellectual disabilities. Some said this was because of their geographic location and trying to access services was difficult. And often people with intellectual disabilities leaving school would rather take a place with a disability support provider who provided transport to and from a day centre or wherever they were based, rather than trying to access education or employment opportunities that wouldn't provide transport to and from the location. Participants who said they were good at transitions had strong special educational needs teams within their school that included some form of leadership, such as principals, deputy principals, or at very least a year head. One of the key findings from this study is that we need to define professional roles. The role of the special needs coordinator is becoming more and more professional with more administrative duties. And I suppose it's a very personal, there's a very personal nature to that role. And the special needs coordinators felt it was very difficult to relinquish responsibility to other staff.
To be honest, I would find it difficult to hand over maybe some of that, like in my mind, to hand over some of that work to other people.
The role of the guidance counsellor in recent years has been cut, and guidance counsellors are now teaching more mainstream classes. They have very little time for mainstream guidance support, not to mention students with additional needs or atypical post-school destinations. And the guidance counsellors were not actively avoiding support for students with intellectual disabilities, but felt that the special needs coordinator would be better positioned to advise. Only one guidance counsellor felt very strongly they should be responsible for this work.
Because the fact is, I think the guidance counsellor is qualified to do this career guidance and should perform it well for every student, and including those that are in units.
So at the stage of the research that we're in, we are now, I suppose we've come up against this question that, do guidance counsellors unconsciously presume students with intellectual disabilities will not have long-term career goals? And perhaps this is why the special needs coordinator would be better to advise on post-school disability support agencies. Participants were also questioned about their opinion on the possible impact of COVID-19 and the school closures in terms of post-school transitions for students in the mainstream and students with intellectual disabilities. For the students in the mainstream, the theme of uncertainty is a recurrent motif within the discussion, and participants expressed empathy towards the students who were awaiting government decisions regarding the Leaving Certificate, which would have major effects on their post-school transition.
I know some of our students have been in touch with some of the questions they have, but they haven't really changed. They're still on the same path they were.
So this quote was in relation to students with intellectual disabilities and their transitioning. So contrary to the uncertainty and experienced by students in the mainstream, with aspirations of attending a higher education institution in September 2020, there was much less concern for students with intellectual disabilities who will be transitioning from school to disability support agencies or to other non-higher education learning environments. As the majority of the transition preparation had been done prior to school closures, students with intellectual disabilities were are less concerned with their end of school exam results, as their post-school destination was non-reliant on academic achievements. In terms of participants' perception of the future impact of COVID-19 closures, there was matters of concerning related to mental health was probably the most popular response from participants, to which they expressed isolation and over-reliance on non-verbal communication, such as text messages or emails or instant message, as a factor which could possibly be damaging to young people's social skills and mental health in years to come. Lastly then, I know I'm coming up on time, so I just want to kind of highlight this in the larger scheme of things. And when we look at transitions for people with intellectual disabilities, we do need to look out further than that. And we need to look at society and how inclusive society is. And I suppose in the light of the coronavirus pandemic, we can use the Sustainable Development Goals to offer a ready-made roadmap to recovery from COVID-19. This Build Back Better movement has been used as a method of reducing risk in the wake of future disasters. The COVID-19 global pandemic has put our economies, social structures, and education systems to the test in recent times. While progress towards achieving the SDGs has been threatened by the COVID-19 pandemic, the need to reset from its effects offers an opportunity to ensure delivery of the SDGs and as a global priority. International research shows that building back better requires consideration given to these three elements: reducing disaster risk in the community, supporting the psychosocial recovery of affected people and regenerating the economy, and implementing reconstruction and recovery in an effective and efficient way. So I suppose every crisis can be used as an opportunity. It is up to us to ensure the world emerges from the pandemic a more just society free from discrimination. We have an opportunity now to build back better with inclusion at the heart of our education system. Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up to questions. And as I said, Michael and Joanne are willing to take some questions as well.
Okay, thanks a million, Des. And a number of questions have been coming in here, so I'm going to try and put them to, you can decide which one of you wants to answer them, if that's okay. I'll start off with the ones that are about the actual research methodology. There was a question about the were there participants in the qualitative phase of data gathering? Were they from public, non-fee paying, or private fee paying schools?
There was a mix. So there was only 9 participants in total, but there was a mix. We tried to make sure that we had a good spread across the different areas that were mentioned there, and we had at least 1 person from a private fee-paying school, 2 from Irish-speaking schools, a couple from the comprehensive and vocational schools, which are the non-fee-paying schools.
Okay, thanks, Des. And then just another question around the research. Did you face any the other question is, did you ask principals or teachers about how much training on special education or inclusive education that they had themselves?
It came up in a lot of the conversations without us asking. We didn't really need to, but it was one of the probes we had within our interview schedule. So we have written about that in a report. I don't have the details of that right here in front of me, but guidance counsellors felt that special needs coordinators were more qualified, and some of the special needs, I'd say maybe 3 off the top of my head, I'm trying to remember, had mentioned doing some sort of master's level around special education and inclusive education. And I suppose they had to fund that privately themselves. They weren't encouraged to do that from a school point of view. It was really out of their own interest that they went on and pursued that extra training.
And this is the final quick question around the practicalities. Did you any problems due to the school closures around COVID-19?
Yeah, definitely. So trying to recruit people for interviews was difficult. I suppose there was an assumption there as well, like there was a lot of talk in the Irish media about students not having access to broadband or to laptops or iPads and things like that, but that was also an issue for teachers. So some people that we had emailed, they said, sorry, I'm in rural Ireland, my broadband isn't strong enough to do this. So we had some practical issues like that. Another issue then that I experienced was trying, I don't know if this is related to COVID-19 or not, but all our interview participants were female. So I had one male participant who was willing to do it, but I suppose in light of COVID, he was actually burnt out by the time they had got everything in order and put everything online and kept the semester going. We were coming towards the summer holidays and he was actually burnt out and he said, no, sorry, I'm not going to participate. So we ended up with no male participants within the qualitative strand.
That's really interesting about the gender mix in some studies like that. Okay, thank you, Des. I'm just going to move to Joanne, if that's okay, because I have one or two other questions. And these are, I suppose, more general questions about the study, about the transition from secondary school. What would you recommend to begin a better transition, is the question, Joanne.
The data findings, the qualitative data findings in particular, really highlighted that where it worked, there was collaboration between the school SENCO. None of this is rocket science when you say it out loud, but collaboration between the school SENCO and the guidance counsellor. So where there was a transfer of information regarding specific students, about how to make successful transitions, and importantly that it happened early in the young person's school career, and it wasn't just something that happened in their 6th year when often many of their decisions are already kind of closed to them, and that it happens before they enter senior cycle. So that it's a constant planning from 2nd year onwards, where there is, I suppose, open communication between various staff members. I think interesting what Des pointed out about the sample in itself was when we contacted the principals, we assumed we would be talking to guidance counsellors about this topic, but invariably the guidance counsellor or the principals suggested perhaps we need to talk to SENCOs as equal as they suggested we talk to guidance counsellors. So that was a finding in itself, in that the guidance counsellor wasn't the go-to person and that the principal thought we should talk to as part of this research study. So I think increased collaboration between those individuals in schools working on the same topic essentially, but just for different groups of students, is essential.
Some of the questions that are coming in here are actually quite interesting because people are asking quite detailed questions about the research methodology. And some, like another question is about did you notice anything between the urban and rural divide in terms of transition?
I don't think we have anything on that. Certainly not. We wouldn't be able to work with the 9 qualitative interviews. I don't think we'd be able to draw anything general from that. And in the quantitative phase of the study, I don't think anything came out, but I would imagine that in terms of the opportunities available to the young people, that their geographic location and the region in which they're in, and whether it's urban and rural, would play a huge part in their planning and their transition planning for the future.
And I just finished with a quick question to you, because then I've got a more kind of a broader question for Michael. Just in relation to the study itself, people want to know when they can read the published results.
Okay, this is a really good question. Okay, research team. We're hoping to launch this report in January. So we're in the final stages. We're currently editing the report. We need to get it peer reviewed and then we'll have it out as soon as possible. But we'll certainly notify the group and have it as widely shared as possible.
Yeah, people we're very interested in this study. And I'm just going to move to Michael now, if that's okay. Michael, there's a kind of a very broad question here. And what the questioner is asking is, are we doing a disservice to young people with intellectual disability by not having expectations on their abilities to attain academic achievements? And the question really is about discrimination. It's a very broad question. And I'm giving you the hard question, Michael.
Yeah, well, I think there's a legacy issue here, you know, that the young people, I think Des referred to it as well. There were very parallel systems. So even when the young people with intellectual disabilities were in mainstream schools, they were often sidelined. So they weren't expected to achieve academically. Now, I think some recent developments in Ireland are helping, because with the National Curriculum and Assessment, National Council for Curriculum Assessment, level 2 and level 3, level 1, level 2, level 3 programs have been introduced, which means that children at a younger age can achieve, and they can achieve in a variety of ways. And we have to encourage that. And there's a senior cycle review going on at the moment. And a lot of the consultation, and certainly many people who participate in those, would have emphasized that it had to be fully accessible to young people with special education needs, that they needed to achieve at a commensurate level, an appropriate level. And that was part of the problem, that these weren't available. And as Des mentioned, the Leaving Cert Applied is at level 4, but it's only really available in socioeconomic disadvantaged areas and those schools. And so for many young people, the choice was either do the Leaving Certificates at probably ordinary level, and I know from another study I was involved in, some young people did that, or else do some made-up program, something that was compiled often by the school, some of it really interesting, some of it very innovative, but it didn't have any accreditation. So undoubtedly, I think the system is shifting, and it's moving towards recognizing that these young people are entitled to have their education recognized and their achievement recognized, and that then leads to ambition for them. But unfortunately, the post-school settings have not been fully developed, because people were expected to go to a day centre, a rehabilitative training, and then a day centre. And really, what we have to do is create the options post-school, so as young people can have a whole range of options, just the same as their peers.
And that leads very nicely onto another question in the chat there, where somebody's asking about, is there anything in the schools that are linking to employment?
I would say very, very little. They would have some work placement as part of transition year, but that tends to be, you know, maybe 2 weeks or else every Friday. It depends on the quality of the transition year, but there isn't an explicit link. Now in the centre, Trinity Centre for People with Intellectual Disabilities, we have a structured pathway into employment. And what we've realised is it has to be a real partnership with the employers. And we have to move away from just thinking it's about hospitality or something functional or menial, in inverted commas, that people will do. We have to move way beyond that, because these young people are well capable of achieving within the workplace, but they just need the opportunity, and they need a more structured pathway, because it would be difficult for them to achieve that within total open employment.
It's interesting now, you know, there's a lots of questions coming in that are quite Irish specific as well, around individualized supports and things like that. But just because for time reasons, I can't get to all the questions. But one thing I would say is that there's a lot of interest in this report, and we would be, when it's ready, we would be happy to put it on the IACID Inclusive Education website, if that's okay with you, because there is a lot of interest. Just as I asked Ruth at the end, is there any question or any topic that I haven't asked you that you were expecting to answer a question on? Is there any final comments any of the three of you would like to make?
I think it's just been I would just say it's been a neglected area. Yeah. And I think it's like everything in inclusive education. We think we've resolved different issues, and then another gap appears, and it's because often we've been retrofitting systems that were not designed to really accommodate young people and build achievement into everything that they do. And I think every child should have an individual plan. How explicit that needs to be is up to the child, the teacher, and the family. But we need to build this ambition in at a very, very early age for all children. And then for these young people to have these pathways that they can have aspire to, rather than sort of turn in and say, oh no, that's not for me. And I think things are beginning to change, but it is slow because of the assumptions are still built in to the existing structures that these young people will not achieve at that level. So that's what has to be challenged. And I think a lot of the work that's happening in Ireland is beginning to challenge that mindset.
I think kind of it's Ruth has just popped in there to the chat as well. And what she's mentioning is the fact that when she was at school, she actually got a placement. And that was really helpful. But I think it's confirming that it's so dependent on where you are, what school you're at, and what supports that are provided in that school. And I think the other thing that it certainly is jumping out at me from what's been talked about already, it's also the family and the parent supports that are being, the parents that are supporting their young people to move and transition. And so therefore it depends on so many different things for that individual person's life, rather than it being a policy that's best practice. So again, I'm going to thank the three of you. There's so many more questions coming in. I've missed some of them. I just want to apologize to the people, the attendees that are putting their hands up. Unfortunately, there's too many questions for us to address them. So I would like people to put the questions in chat, or questions and answers if they could, please. And I'm going to hand you over to Tobias again. Sorry, Michael, yeah.
All I would say is that if there's some individual points that people give their contacts, we would try and engage with them if there are particular areas, and they may have a similar interest. And if there's work we could do together on that, that would be great, you know.
And people are very, very welcome to email me, and I can you know, make the links with yourselves as well. Okay, thanks again. And I'm going to hand you back to Tobias. You need to turn on your sound there, Tobias.
Thank you for this very fascinating presentation, which very multi-layered insights on transitions in the Republic of Ireland. Thank you for that. So, as mentioned, now we're coming to our third presentation of today by Amani Carissa, and likewise, I will introduce Amani now to you. Amani Carissa wrote an outstanding PhD thesis on understanding father involvement in the education of learners with intellectual disabilities in a special school in Kenya. Amani works as lecturer at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. He has published in different peer-reviewed international journals, such as Disability and Society. Amani's area of research interest are critical disability studies, inclusive education, masculinities, family, and post-colonial theory. Amani, we are very glad to have you here today, and I'm looking forward to your presentation very much.
Thank you. Let me just put on my Is my screen visible, please?
No, I'm sorry, Amani, you're sharing the wrong screen. You're sharing the webinar screen.
Okay.
Yes, now that's correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I am Dr. Amani Carissa from University of Cape Town.
I'm sorry, Amani.
Welcome.
Amani, I'm sorry for interrupting you again. You just need to show the slideshow rather than your own notes beside it. So
okay.
Yeah, it's okay if you just go back to show slideshow. You had it perfect the last time.
Show slideshow.
From the beginning, yeah, that's it. Perfect.
Are you seeing my notes now?
Yes,
I can go ahead.
Notes. Just the way you had it previously was correct the last time.
Okay. Because I need to see my notes. I don't know. I need to use my notes. So I'm just.
Yeah, no, use it this way if you prefer. That's absolutely fine.
Okay, I thought they would hide or something, but maybe there's a problem I did. Okay, so Dr. Manikaresa from UCT, and welcome as I share with you some perspectives that I've gathered around further involvement in the education of children with intellectual disabilities. My presentation today is called Considering Stopping His Schooling so that the father teaches him any job, navigating the transitions of disabled children in Africa. And I start by asking us to reflect on the following questions. What is education? And what is the purpose of education? Why do we go to school? And what is the purpose of education for children with intellectual disabilities fit in all this? I hope to address some of these questions in this presentation, and I also hope to provoke other questions in your mind, that questions that I may not have answers to. But how did I get to thinking about this topic and come up with the above listed questions? In 2016, I was implementing a project with an governmental organization. The goal was to improve school enrollment, attendance, and learning outcomes of marginalized children in Kenya. During one of my field visits to a special school, I met disabled children who were still in the dormitory, despite the school having been closed in the past 3 weeks. The parents of the children had not come to pick them up, even after being informed by the teachers that the school had closed. I came to learn that it was common for some of the children to stay in the school until the next term began. It seemed that the parents and guardians considered sending their disabled children to the residential special school as a relief, as they were a burden to them at home. So they did not want them back. I was not only saddened by this, but I also intrigued by what it meant for this. What made the parents behave the way they did. So, as fathers are traditionally the heads of families in African societies and also perhaps in other contexts, I set to understand the nature of father involvement in the education of learners with intellectual disabilities. And I conducted a case study of one public special school in Kenya. I placed the study in the constructivism paradigm, so it is basically a qualitative study. And I used purposive sampling to collect data from 9 teachers, 8 fathers, 6 mothers, and 6 learners with intellectual disabilities through individual interviews, key informant interviews, focus group discussions, document review, and field notes. I analyzed the data thematically, and today I focus on the theme of transitions, and I'll do my best to present it in a narrative form. So I argue that the need to access formal education is inseparable from the need to transition. And the views of fathers about the purpose of educating the children with intellectual disabilities can help us understand this crucial issue of school transition. So what's the purpose of education for children with intellectual disabilities? And according to most of the fathers I talked to, the purpose of educating disabled children was to impart functional skills in order to make the disabled children self-reliant. Such skills were favored more than academic skills by the fathers. If the education failed to impart these skills, it became pointless. For instance, a father stated, "My most important thing is to ask teachers to try hard to make everyone meet his or her goals. If that happens, even us, the parents, will see our child has gone to a certain place, but as at now, he is doing a certain work. It will be a relief to us. Not that the child is here and he lives without any hope in life and becomes a burden again to the parents. It won't be good. But take the example, he leaves the school and I'm called by the teacher to be told, these are his certificates and we have sent him in this job. And if he takes this job well, it will support his life." Thus, according to this father, the acquisition of skills that the disabled children could use to support their day-to-day life was important. Many fathers wanted what the children were learning at school to be useful at home. The teachers also appreciated the need to make the education at the school adapt to the functional needs of the children. For instance, it had been stated in a teachers' meeting that schemes of work to be written according to the ability of the child. The teachers not to focus on classwork, but to see that learners are totally transformed. However, this transformation was not what some of the fathers felt was happening to their disabled children. According to a father, it appeared the school activities, if any, ended at school and the home activities ended at home. There was no link between the two environments. For example, the father noted that his disabled child functioned well at home in undertaking the tasks he asked her to do. However, when he asked the disabled child about what she had been taught at school, the child responded, "The work ends at school." So this disheartened the father as he felt that the school was not doing enough for the child to function at home. The father added that whenever he visited the school, he only saw the children playing. The father stated, "So such things contribute to the way we are. Sometimes we get disturbed by that situation of the children. If we could find them attentive in class, being taught, then we could take more responsibility." It means that if the teachers were prepared to put in the effort to teach the children what this father perceived to be important at the school, the father would equally make an effort to involve himself in the school. From this, when some fathers perceived the school to be not giving their disabled children valuable skills, they avoided involving themselves in the affairs of the child at the school. Sometimes the fathers went ahead to teach their disabled children at home the skills they perceived to be valuable. For example, although a father had been reported to have completely snubbed his disabled child's education at the special school, he had been involved in teaching the child functional skills at home. A mother said the following about her husband: "Because he believes that she is not good in academics, but she works best using her hands. When my husband is at home in the morning, he tells the child, 'Riziki, take this broom and sweep,' and she usually does as instructed. My husband likes sending her to do manual chores. Like if it's a cup, he says, 'Wash this cup, don't put it there.' He says he believes the child is good at manual work. So if you take her to school, it's like bothering yourself. So he likes sending her to do some chores. Consequently, the father was involved with teaching his disabled child in the ways he saw best to impart functional skills. At the same time, this disabled child appeared to enjoy undertaking the tasks that required the use of functional skills, like fetching water. The mother said, "Yeah, my child likes fetching water," and it follows that there seemed to be an alternative system of education that was vouched for by some of the fathers, a home-based system that focused on the acquisition of functional skills. Some mothers equally seem to support this alternative system of education. They saw the education offered to the disabled learners at the special school as futile. Referring to her disabled daughter, a mother said, "She doesn't grasp anything at school, but you might teach her a song, something she likes. You might teach her today and come next January, she still remembers it. But in class, you might teach her and tomorrow she can't remember what she learned. So she's good at manual work, singing, dancing." The question then was why the children will continue attending the school where they were not learning anything. Why not stay at home where they could learn some valuable skills? Societal pressures and fear of the government appear to make the parents take their disabled children to the special school, even if they did not believe in the usefulness of such an education system. A mother who had not seen the need for schooling formally her child who could not walk and speak, and whose husband had snubbed the formal education of the disabled child, had to take the child to the special school. Nevertheless, following threats by the doctor, the mother said, the doctor insisted that I take her to school and said that if I failed to do so, he would sue me. Another mother stated that, like my child, I feel like I'm exhausting him. And the government says the child shouldn't remain at home. So I don't understand. It will continue like that till when? This mother had wanted to stop the child from coming to school when he reached 16, but the husband did not allow it. He perceived sending the child to schools as a way of keeping the child, away from bad habits in the community. On the same note, approximately 20% of the children in the school were aged more than 18 years, with some in their mid-30s. It was not clear how long these children were to continue coming to the school. The school in this case seemed to be an everlasting care center for the disabled learners, which was far from the goal of imparting knowledge and life skills. In spite of the reservations on the usefulness of the special school in terms of education, These parents had to continue sending their disabled children to school because it was government policy. Interestingly, some of the learners still in the school had already acquired significant functional skills that could make them live independently. For example, this learner said, in the afternoon after we have finished eating and we go to class at 2 p.m., we usually do beadwork, make bead bangles using our hands, make mats, we learn skills. The children sold the products they made and kept the money for themselves. However, they complained that they were not making good sales at the time because of lack of buyers of the products. Another learner said, but the business in this town is now down. You can make them, I mean the big bead bangles and the mats, and remain with them at home. You depend on people to buy, but thus the skills that the children had acquired from the school seemed not sufficient for them to lead independent lives because they were not marketable enough. This could explain why some of the fathers did not want their children to leave the school yet, even when they had acquired some functional skills. These fathers wanted their disabled children to continue coming to the school for as long as it took them to acquire additional functional skills. They hoped that the school could train the children in more marketable skills like woodwork and metalwork. It was not certain when the school would start such initiatives, but the fathers seemed prepared to wait. A father said, I have not removed him out of school because I am not satisfied that he can be able to survive, even though he can do laundry, sweep his house, and also go to the farm and till the land. Though all his stealing requires supervision. So I want him to have more skills in manual work. Some mothers seemed not to agree with the above stand of the father. A mother stated, because he continues to be big, when will coming to school end? I want to see him also working. Another issue then was why the special school seemed not to have the end that the mainstream system of education had, where children left school to lead lives like anyone else. For example, the disabled child whose father we have just quoted was 2 years old and had not left the school. Some mothers felt that if the disabled children were adults, it was of no use for them to stay in the school. Such children now needed to be working or to be doing something else like everyone else was doing. A mother said, so for me, I have been considering stopping him from coming to the school so that the father teaches him any job, even if it's carpentry and so forth. The said father of the child was a carpenter and the mother wanted him to pass the skill to the child. This talked to the idea of a home-based system that emphasized functional skills. However, even with that, the issue was still complex. The mother reasoned, but even in carpentry, others use machines, and my child is sometimes forgetful. So I don't know how it will be. I don't know how I should help my child. It makes me confused. The mother was facing a paradox. The special school was no longer beneficial to the child, but at the same time, she did not know how the father will assist the child at home. The paradox was expanded on by another mother who said, our children here are those with intellectual disabilities. They do come to school, but they are not good in the manual work and are not good in academics. They are not slow learners. If you ask her to go to the toilet, she will go, but the next day she might refuse. So like such cases, they will continue coming to school till what time? This mother's point seemed to reinforce the feelings of some fathers that programs at the school were not beneficial to the disabled learners. However, on the part of the teachers, they appeared not to have a problem with how long the disabled learners remained in the school. They nevertheless tended to be in agreement on the need to impart functional skills to the disabled learners. According to them, this was what the school was aiming at. A teacher said, the goal for the children is not to finish school only, but to educate the child to know what's life. How can she live without a job? Meaning, how can she be self-employed? To ensure self-reliance can live without a problem, self-reliance and independence. This teacher expounded that the school was aware that disabled learners could find it difficult to find formal employment because of stigma and general unemployment challenge in Kenya. He explained, first of all, it's hard for a person who has not finished grade 8 in Kenya to get a job. Even those with degrees can fail to get jobs in Kenya. So if that is the situation, and we know that our children cannot be employed by any person in Kenya, why shouldn't the child employ herself? Why shouldn't she take care of her needs in life? So accordingly, imparting functional skills to the disabled learners was necessary to prepare the children for self-employment. This teacher agreed with that perception. On the same note, a record of the teachers meeting read that handling learners with special needs requires a lot of practical work than written work. It has been a bit challenging to handle the mixed abilities of learners, but the teachers tried their best to use concrete teaching materials, where learners touch, feel, and do the actual activities like sewing, threading, others doing buttoning, block building, hairdressing, washing, and ironing. Thus, the teachers and the parents largely agreed on the need to impart functional skills to the disabled children. What seemed to be in contention was whether the school was actually teaching the functional skills, how long such an education should take, which functional skills were to be taught, and whether the functional skills could lead to a job or not. A teacher elaborated the challenge in this way. So according to our illustration here, the children are many and the workers are few. So you find that we just persevere because there's nowhere we can take the children. The teacher was saying that the school was overwhelmed by the population of the disabled learners. This sentiment appeared to back the father's perception that the school was not doing enough for the disabled learners. On a positive note, though, there was evidence of disabled children who had left the school to work independently elsewhere. Her father stated, because there was my young cousin, my aunt's child, her children joined earlier and they gained skills for making shoes using beads. After they got the skills of making bead shoes, she removed them from the school and bought them the raw materials. They're making the shoes and they are earning their living as usual. Accordingly, while some participants felt the school was not helpful to the disabled learners, there was proof that the school could be beneficial. And I conclude by saying that there seems to be an agreement on the need to impart functional skills to the disabled learners. However, a contention exists whether the school is doing enough towards this purpose. While some fathers find the school beneficial to the disabled learners, others feel that it is not doing what it is supposed to be doing. The fathers not only want the school to train the disabled children in functional skills, but in functional skills that will lead to jobs. The school seems to focus only on training the disabled learners on occupations without necessarily considering whether such skills could lead to jobs or not. Thus, the teachers and the fathers seem not to understand each other with regard to the purpose of educating the disabled children. Some fathers imply that an alternative home-based system of education that focuses on imparting the perceived useful functional skills is more beneficial than the special school education. Some of the fathers have invoked the urgency and are already practicing this system of education, teaching the disabled children at home that which the fathers believe is beneficial. This means that some fathers are involved in their own ways in the education of their disabled children. They are using the indigenous understanding of the purpose of education, which is to impart knowledge that could be put into immediate use by the learner. As a way forward, the theoretical idea of hybridity that stems from postcolonial studies could be useful. Instead of the school disrupting this effort of the fathers, the two systems could work in synergy rather than in competition or conflict. Parting shot is most participants in this study want the education of the disabled children to mean more than mere access to schools. The fathers put great importance on the real life benefit of the education of the disabled children. When they send children to school, they have transition in mind. Of what use is an education system for learners with intellectual disabilities that does not lead to transitioning to jobs and consequently independent living after school? Seems to be the question that the fathers are asking. Thank you very much.
Amani, that was really, really fascinating. And I think I can speak for a lot of people that were listening, getting that perspective of fathers was what people are saying in the chat. And I suppose, again, if you don't mind, just one or two questions. One question that somebody's asking here is, what would you think was the biggest difference between the mothers and the fathers?
I wouldn't say there was a difference. That both parties had views that were linked to each other, and they also had differences. Like in a way, some mothers were challenging the education offered at the school, and in some mothers were saying it's good. They should, let's just send them there so that they can be safe. Have a safe space. And this idea also was with the fathers also. Some fathers were saying there's no need of us staying with them at home. Let's send them to school. So I mean both sides, and then there were those mothers who were like saying it is we should move them out. So I wouldn't say there's a major difference. They all had their own independent views, and yeah, it wasn't not clear, not very clear cut the difference.
Yeah, and just a few more people are commenting on the fact that they're very interested in the father's perspective. But one question was about, am I right in saying this, that some of the fathers felt it might be better just to teach them at home and not send them to school at all? Was that, am I right? And where do you think that has come from?
Okay, I feel like to answer that question, we have to go back to how these fathers from an African context were used to do it, how it used to be done in the past. This space of the school was not there, but it doesn't mean education didn't happen. So now it's like the space of the school, but they're saying it is not. It might not be very helpful. Like what we're getting from that school might not be very beneficial to us. So they're like saying, can we go back to our old ways of understanding education, where we just used to teach our children skills that they could put into immediate use. So I think that's where it is coming from.
Right.
There is that tension, yes.
Okay, and just a final question is, just this study took place in a special school. Would you have any comments on the place of inclusive education then?
Okay, so this is an interesting one, because I was expecting fathers to say that to use the argument for inclusive education as what is evil with special school, but they were like, for us, we don't really, can I say, care where this education happens. We want to see the product of this education. So for us, it's like it can happen in the special school, inclusive setting, or even at home. What we care is about the actual inclusion in society. So it was like which education, the education should lead to inclusion in the community, because that's where yeah, you can't have children staying in I mean yeah, so it's something that for them inclusion is more in the society, something that will lead to inclusion in society, but not really at the school level. And I think this comes from the indigenous understanding of education also. It's not about the space. Yes.
Interesting, Amanda, as well, that with a comment here saying that fathers had a vision for their children, and that was interesting. And so there's loads of questions coming in, but just to try, just one or two more. What is the breakdown between children with disabilities going to special schools and mainstream schools in Kenya?
Okay, I wouldn't have an answer to that, because I have to, yes.
Yeah, and is the father typically in charge of decisions, would you say?
Yes, but then also it's not very easy. It's a complex question. It's not a very easy, it doesn't have an easy answer, because there are specific spheres where the mother is in charge, and the specific spheres where so they like, it's a synergy kind of. Like when it comes to resources and money, the father, but when it comes to home, and sometimes it is even the other way around. Yeah.
Just like I asked the other panelists, Amanda, is there any question that you were expecting to be asked that you weren't asked?
Thank you. I wouldn't. I think I'm good. Yes.
Okay, Amanda, there's just other comments are coming in, things like they feel it's a very good presentation because the area is neglected, and hearing the perspectives of fathers is really important. So I'm just going to hand back to Tobias again. Thanks very much, Manny.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you, Amani, and thanks to all three presenters for this beautiful, very, very interesting presentations, which were really fascinating, I think. It's kind of tough to draw some conclusions, but I think what we saw today were presentations that addressed very different perspectives, different topics around transitions, and provided us with a diversity of insights coming from different parts of the world using different theoretical angles. What do these accounts, these research studies tell us? What do they teach us? I think, first of all, they teach us how powerful structures, ableist expectations can be, but also what a different, more empowering, inclusive attitudes can make, and which agency one has, even in the restrictions of structures. What do they teach us as well? I think they teach us that every person needs to be recognized and treated as an individual. As well, I think all the presentations showed us the benefits of engaging in global collaborations and exchange on topics around inclusive education in general and transitions in specific. I hope Michael, Des, Joanne, and Amani, you won't mind if I will close my conclusions with referring to Ruth's presentation. I think Ruth, what your biographical account told us is which transitions can be possible. Transitions where you can choose and find a job on the first labor market, where you get the appropriate support, live in your own flat, and lead a self-determined life. And this was very empowering and interesting, this account, and I think it shows us a way what can be and what we should continue all to work on and what our research should aim to establish. So I would leave it with this, as we have already, as time has approached already very far, and would lead back to you, Deirdre.
Okay, just a little plug for our for the IACID, our organization, and in particular our Inclusive Education SERG, which is a special interest group. We would like to welcome anybody who wants to join IACID, in particular join the Inclusive Education SERG, to go onto the website and have a look. And, you know, we can see here some of the activities and the things that you can be involved in if you decide to join IACID and Inclusive Education. Just to say that we are going to run another webinar where it's under negotiation about the date that we're going to run that webinar as yet. We'll get back to you as soon as possible with the date for that. And just a quote here about one of our students saying, some teachers were wonderful and some were a complete disgrace. So we're hoping to have to give you some voices of students with intellectual disabilities on inclusive education in our webinar. Our final plug is for the 6th IACID European Congress. That's on in Amsterdam from the 6th to the 8th of July. And the call for abstracts is still out. It's been extended into January. So if people are interested in that as well, we'd welcome any additional applications. So finally, I just want to say a big thank you again to our presenters. And I want to give a special thank you to Jennifer today, because we had a couple of technical hitches at the beginning and she really, really supported us. And everybody who's involved in this, and also to Nikki, who's based in Tasmania, who's helped us with the management and the organization of it. So again, everybody who's attended will be sent a certificate. We have your email addresses and you're welcome to contact us and to look at our website where we'll put up copies of the presentation. So just to finally say, we've just come to the last 2 minutes. A big thank you and my apologies if I missed your question, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to answer more questions at the next webinar. So a big thank you for myself and everybody in IACID. Thanks.